The discussant is Dr. Lakshmikant Dwivedi. He is Associate Professor in the Department of Demography and Statistics at International Institute for Population Sciences, and he is involved in National Family Health Survey as well. Our rapporteur is Dr. Ritti Gogal. She is Assistant Professor in the Department of Population Policies and Programs at International Institute for Population Sciences. She is working on the field of aging studies and other related research activities. I hand over this session to the chairperson, Dr. S. Niranjan, and he will tell you how many minutes each of you would present. Sir, handing over to you, Dr. Niranjan, sir. Niranjan, sir.
So much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Famous that COVID certain community. We have a very exciting during pandemic technology, a lot of opportunity, various kinds. Same time, we think and estimate the COVID on various things. Can you hear me? So breaking.
I think there is a problem of internet connectivity. I think, yeah. Otherwise, you can speak. No problem. You can mute your video. Yes, sir.
Switch off my nose.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
is it better now?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
yeah.
Sir.
Thanks
Yes,
so much once again. And this is an exciting session that I'm going to learn a lot from the presenters. As I said, the COVID-19 has created lots of challenges to the health system and also to the service providers, and it is continuing to be a problem. We don't know where we are going to be in the next 3 months with respect to the COVID, but at the same time, researchers have done a lot of innovative things given the technology and the other innovations. And so maybe without wasting much time, let's first go into the to hear the presenters, and we have about 5 presenters. All 5 of them are here, and we have about little less than 90 minutes to cover the session. So what I would propose is that if each of you can take 10 minutes for the presentation, and maybe at about 9 minutes, I'll alert you on saying that it's 1 or 2 minutes for you to wrap up. So that will be the check, so that it gives us enough time for having discussion, because this is an interesting area. The data collection during pandemic, what are the challenges and what are the opportunities? And then we'll also have the question and answer, the discussion towards the end of session after all the presentations are complete. Is that sounding okay to everyone? So yeah. So what let me first invite Dr. Jayant Kumar Basu to speak about measuring excess mortality during the COVID-19 pandemic in India, the need for mobile phone service. Dr. Basu, over to you.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Just give me a second. Go to Uh, my presentation is visible? Hello?
Not yet. Yes. Yes, you need to click on the presentation though. Yes. Go ahead.
I have opened the presentation.
Your time starts now.
Yeah. So basically, the thought behind this paper, it came to me, is understanding the situation in low and middle income countries like India, where data from civil registration system do not allow monitoring excess mortality during the COVID-19 pandemic. Basically, the India's health system is facing significant challenges, including understanding the trajectory of COVID-19 virus and determining the best allocation of health resources. These challenges are further exacerbated by the limited data available. Government of India's Integrated Disease Surveillance Program, IDSP, as we know, has been collecting data on COVID-19 cases and deaths from designated government and private testing labs and hospitals with testing facilities. While these efforts have been significant, really appreciable, the major limitation is that the government has no way of tracking the deaths outside of these labs and hospitals. Dependence on data from government recognized testing facilities alone on disease surveillance is inadequate, as only a limited proportion of India's population has access to these facilities. Further, as we know, in India, a significant number of deaths are either not registered or are registered without important information such as age and sex of the deceased. Most deaths are not assigned to a cause of death by the trained medical professionals. As a result of this, the limitations of Government of India's inadequate information on a large section of the population who are more likely to be the BPL, the malnourished or otherwise vulnerable like migrant population. This lack of information increases the likelihood that India's COVID-19 responsible will fail to meet the needs of this population. So understanding this and experiences elsewhere show that mobile phone service aimed at measuring the mortality in a monthly basis are a realistic and safe option for filling that gap. The data generated by MPS can play a key role in better targeting areas or population groups most affected by the pandemic. They can also help monitor the impact of intervention and programs and rapidly identify what works in mitigating the impact of the COVID-19. So this paper is particularly based on the Dex reviews of literature and secondary data. And finally, it suggests different approaches to measuring the excess mortality using mobile phone service. Monitoring mortality is an essential component, as we know, effective response to the COVID-19 pandemic. In LMMC, like India, the surveillance system usually undercount the number of deaths due to COVID-19, but civil registration systems are insufficiently complete to fill this data gap. Instead, researchers often use the models to assess what effects epidemic might have on mortality in this LMMIC. Reduced healthcare utilization could cause a large effects on maternal and child health in particular. Interim tools, such the interim tools are basically needed to assess excess mortality to COVID-19. So surveys that constitute primarily sources of mortality data are too infrequent. It's not being done very regularly in the country. So, and further, these in-person inquiries also pose significant health risks in the context of COVID-19 as they involve face-to-face interaction with several respondents. And mobile phone survey represent the most viable alternative in such situation to safely generating timely data on excess mortality. Thus, the paper suggests the paper will further talk, the presentation will further talk on the different of mobile phone survey. Basically, as we said, it is information are based on extensive text reviews of literature and secondary data. So some of the approaches of mobile phone services is that how will participate be selected? So it's a major challenge to select the participants. Mortality MPS could select participant from list of valid phone numbers obtained either from mobile operators or from individuals enrolled in prior studies. This list might allow selecting geographically targeted samples, example cities or urban areas. If list of valid numbers are not available, surveyors might need to contact potential respondents using random digit dialing procedures. In some setting, MPS participants could also be sampled from registries of beneficiaries maintained by NGOs, thus allowing assessing mortality among particularly vulnerable groups, example, migrant workers. Next is that which questions should be asked to measure the excess mortality? Mortality MPS can build on standardized instruments as we have in the in-person survey, what we are using these days. This includes the inquiries about the recent deaths of the household members or about the survival of the respondents' relatives, example, parents, children, or siblings. But we need to keep in mind that data on household deaths allow estimating mortality over the entire age range, whereas the questionnaires about the respondents' relatives will direct mortality estimates for specific age groups. And we should restrict the interviews within 20 to 30 minutes to avoid any interruption due to network failure or respondent fatigue. Next is how large and how frequent should mortality be? The required sample size of each MPS depends on one, the pre-pandemic mortality levels, expected excess mortality during COVID-19 pandemic, local socio-demographic factors like example household size, the extent of data disaggregation required, what level of disaggregation we want, for example, whether we seek subnational estimates. Past experience, contrary to the past experiences in Europe and Latin American countries, in India, the excess mortality might be lower due to younger population structure, but other factors, example, prevalence of tuberculosis or cardiovascular disease might counteract this protective effect. And in such case, simulation calibrated to match local context should inform the sample size calculation. Next is where will the pre-COVID-19 mortality baseline come from? It is recommended obtaining the pre-COVID-19 mortality baseline directly from the MPS data. This will require asking the respondents to report the months of a death to accurately classify the deaths as having occurred before or during the COVID-19 pandemic, and next is account for seasonal variation in mortality, and further internal consistency checks should be applied to verify that this baseline is not affected by date displacement or other respondents' error. Next is should mortality MPS include questions about the circumstances and causes of death? The extent of testing services for COVID-19 is limited in LMIC, including India. So few individuals will have been diagnosed with COVID-19 prior to the death. In the absence of such data, MPS should include an assessment of comorbidities and symptoms to evaluate the likelihood that death is related to COVID-19. MPS should also include questions on the care seeking before the death to identify barriers to testing and service utilization during the pandemic. Questions about the place of death, example, whether it is in home or institutional, deaths in institutional health facilities. would enable assessment of the completeness of data from surveillance system. Further, to reduce the burden on respondent, questions about the symptoms and other circumstances surrounding reported deaths might be limited to events having occurred in a recent past. Finally, questions about the socioeconomic status of the respondents and their deceased relatives can also be asked. How this could be administered? Mortality questions are often very sensitive to us, we know. For example, when the respondents are still grieving, to ask such questions. The information about the ages and date requested in the mortality questionnaire can also be complicated to obtain and record. Example, the time since the death happened. So mortality MPS should thus be preferably be conducted by the trained interviewers rather than by SMS or response system. Mortality MPS should also provide respondent information on local resources for grief counseling and psychosocial support. So at the end of the interview can give them an idea and give them a support and guide them with the information on local resources for grief counseling. Having said all these approaches, there are certain limitations of MPS. The mortality data collected by MPS will display errors and biases similar to those encountered during in-person survey. For example, families with low mortality might be overrepresented in the MPS sample due to survivor bias. Further, estimating relative increase in mortality during the COVID-19 pandemic and comparing these estimates across the countries will require statistical models that might at times yield discrepant estimates. Again, inferring the number of excess deaths in population from MPS data will present further challenges. Again, MPS often have high non-response rates. So this is the experience in elsewhere in other countries also. So this can only be partially remedied by giving airtime incentives to the respondents. Finally, in conclusion, in low and lower middle income countries like India, data from civil registration system do not allow monitoring excess mortality during the COVID-19 pandemic. Particularly in India, with limited CRVS systems, lack of information to monitor the effects of COVID-19 on mortality. So under such situation, rapid mobile phone surveys, MPS, aimed at measuring mortality trends on monthly basis are a realistic and safe option for filling that database. Because MPS have potential to provide such information and thus inform interventions and programs. And we know there is a high penetration of mobile phones in the country and limited cost of MPS. So frequent mortality MPS should be included in plans to respond to the pandemic in the country. The data generated by MPS can play a key role in better targeting the areas or population groups most affected by the pandemic. They can also help monitoring the impact on interventions and rapidly identify what works in mitigating the impact of COVID-19. So that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dr. Basu, for outlining the strategy for estimating excess mortality during the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, I'm sure there will be a lot of questions over this methodology. As you stated in one of the limitations that could be the phone access or the response bias. And we'll have that conversation towards the after all the presentations are over. Now, may I invite Anjali Sharma to present Is Digitization a Solution to Socio-Economic and Health-Related Challenges of Future Pandemic? Ms. Anjali Sharma, over to you.
Yes, sir. Is my slide visible?
Yes, it is visible. Can you put it in PowerPoint mode?
Yes.
Sure, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. My topic is digitalization, a solution to socioeconomic and health-related challenges of future pandemics. So, as we know, whenever a disaster or a pandemic strikes, it does not only affect the loss of lives and property, but it has a drastic impact on the dimensions of human development, that is health, education, and economy. Likewise, COVID-19 outbreak has also affected the world drastically, and it is not only restricted to the rising number of confirmed cases of COVID, but has severely affected the three dimensions of human development. So, this paper attempts to understand how effectively digitalization has helped or can help in dealing with pandemics in India, as Indian government had launched an important reform known as the Digital India in 2015. Several literatures have identified that there has been severe impact on economy, health, and education through closure of schools and colleges, or the shifting of resources to the COVID-19 patients, or loss of job. So the aim of this paper is to understand the relevance of digitalization as a solution to cope up with socio-economic and health-related challenges of future pandemics. And there are two objectives of my paper. First is to highlight the socioeconomic and health-related challenges that is intensified due to COVID-19, and further to understand the extent of digitalization in India, particularly focusing on digital divide. I begin my study with a literature review to understand the impact of COVID-19. And further, I analyzed the secondary data to understand the extent of digitalization, where I referred NSSO report and NCRB report. Further, I conducted a primary survey through online platform with the simple random sampling, and I got 301 respondents. And I covered three dimensions majorly, as I mentioned earlier. Within social dimension, I covered education. In economic dimension, I have covered source of income, access to daily essentials. And in health dimension, I have covered non-COVID health issues and mental health. Further, univariate and bivariate analysis were performed. So these are my findings. Our secondary data reveals that among all the age groups, the knowledge about using internet is higher in urban areas and among male population as compared to rural areas and female respondents. And it is highest in 15 to 29 years age group, which comprise of people of school, higher education, or potential job seekers, or the working age population. On the other hand, 60 years and above age group, which comprised of people having non-COVID and chronic diseases, have lower knowledge of using internet. Our primary survey shows that there is large percentage of population having access to internet connection, as the survey was conducted online. So this was as expected, but 80% of rural respondents have mentioned that they have faced network or connectivity problem, and 63% of rural respondents face electricity problem. Even in urban areas, there is 47% of people who have faced a network or connectivity problem, and 30% have faced electricity problem. Moving to the first challenge, that is education related challenge. I have found that 80% of my respondents of rural areas have faced education related problem, and this percentage is around 55 for urban areas. Mostly the alternative method for education is followed include online classes and sharing of reading material in both urban and rural areas. There is very little percentage of population who have not got any alternative method, but within this small percentage, the rural respondents are higher as compared to urban respondents. Then when asked about the issues faced in online classes, the major issue faced was network problem, followed by difficulty in doubt clearance and electricity problem or the excess of books and reading materials. When after this, we have also asked about whether they have ever used digital education initiative of MHRD. So we have found that around 60% of respondents have never used such initiative. When talked about the usefulness of digitalization in educational needs during pandemic, urban respondents have shown more positive response as compared to rural respondents. Now moving on to economic challenges, we have found that 50% of rural respondents have got their source of income affected due to pandemic, and this percentage is 37% in urban areas. 75% of rural respondent doesn't find any support from online platform in continuing their job or finding another job, but this percentage is 34% for urban areas who have started work from home after the pandemic. Now looking at the access to daily essentials, we have found that 60% of rural respondents have faced difficulty in accessing daily essentials as compared to urban population, which is 40%. Urban respondents have found more comfort in ordering daily essentials online as compared to rural respondents. And the major reason for not ordering daily essentials online has been the quality of products and their cost. Now moving on to health related challenges, we have found that around 60% of rural respondents and 65% of urban respondents have faced difficulty in regular health checkups. And around 33% of urban respondents have consulted doctor online, but only 21% of rural respondents have consulted doctor online. The major reason for not consulting doctor online among rural respondents is that they have lack of information about online consultancy. And among urban respondents, trust issue is the major reason. Now moving on to mental health challenges, we have found that around 50% of our respondents have faced mental health challenges during the pandemic, and this is slight low in rural area as compared to urban area. When asked about the usefulness of online platform for dealing with such mental health issues, we have found that the urban respondents have found it more useful as compared to rural respondent. Around 30% of rural respondents have said that online platform is not useful for dealing for mental health issues. When asked about their safety on online platform, we have found that urban respondents feel more unsafe as compared to rural respondents according to our study. And even the NCRB report has shown that the cybercrime has been increasing drastically. So the question arises, can digitalization be a solution to future pandemics? And our respondents have argued that around 60% of them have said that given positive response to this question. So the key findings of this paper is that education, economic and health related needs are severely affected due to COVID-19, and a major segment of population has gone online to cope up with these challenges. But the access and knowledge of the digital platform are quite low in all the states of India and among all age groups. There is a strong digital divide and there is a serious concern about online safety. So government interference is very much needed in such a scenario when there are in such a scenario to increase the access of internet, electricity and electronic devices and knowledge of digital technology to all people. As we can see in the case of Bihar, recently the government of India have launched a scheme of optical fiber to reach the rural areas and provide their Wi-Fi connection to them. So such initiatives should be scaled up to the national level to all the villages. Also, there is a need to increase the awareness about digital initiatives of Government of India, as there are several initiatives but people have no idea about it. There should be initiatives to provide the trainings to both consumer and producer of the information. like patients and the doctors, students and teachers, both should be trained. And further, there should be steps to ensure safety of the users and awareness about cyber crimes. Quality of prices and quality and prices of products at online platforms should be controlled by the government. And lastly, there should be steps to promote telehealth system. So I would like to conclude that digitalization can be a solution to future pandemics if access and knowledge of the platform are encouraged and online safety is ensured. Also, government of interventions are required to make digital platforms strong, transparent, and reliable for future pandemics. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ms. Anjali. That's excellent work to understand the utilization of the digital digitization in both urban and rural areas. I'm sure people will have a lot of questions about the challenges that you may have encountered in this process and what have been the limitations of this type of data collection. Let's hear those towards the end. Now, may I invite Ms. Neha Abraham to present on the results and lessons from Swabhiman impact evaluation sites in rural India. Over to you. Ms. Neha, could you put it in slide mode? And also, in case you're speaking, we can't hear you, or at least I can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, this is good. Thank you.
So good afternoon. I'm presenting lessons from Swabhiman's impact evaluation sites on telemonitoring continuity of adolescents and women's nutrition services delivered by women collectives during the COVID-19 lockdown. So the context for this was the Swabhiman program, which is a multi-sectoral nutrition program led by women collectives under the National Rural Livelihoods Mission. The program has a nested prospective non-randomized control evaluation with baseline, midline, and endline surveys, as well as a process evaluation. Interventions of the program are being implemented in 5 sites across 4 districts: Purnia district in Bihar, Bastar district in Chhattisgarh, and Anugul and Koraput districts in Odisha. The announcement of the nationwide lockdown disrupted delivery of program interventions. So it was thus critical to understand the impact on field activities and also to support the ongoing evaluation, for which we adopted a telemonitoring process. So this presentation will share results and lessons of telemonitoring in low technology areas where Swabhiman interventions are being implemented. So I'll begin with a brief overview of the program. Swabhiman is a 4-year large-scale demonstration program. And up till 2020, the program has reached approximately 150,000 target groups and has engaged over 4,000 self-help groups across intervention sites, where a package of 5 essential nutrition-specific and nutrition-sensitive interventions are being implemented. This is done through a combination of community-led and system strengthening interventions to promote behavior change, generate demand, and improve coverage of nutrition and health services. Community actions are carried out by a federated structure of women collectives comprising of self-help groups at Tier 1, village organizations at Tier 2, and cluster-level federations at Tier 3. The interventions are led by trained community resource persons selected from each village organization called Poshan Sakhis. In Bihar, an additional resource person, a Kishori Sakhi, also engages adolescent girls. 323 community resource persons are engaged right at the moment under the program. So in the context of the lockdown, which was announced on March 24th, the objectives of telemonitoring were To understand the status of activities led by EOs and CLFs, to gain a field perspective on entitlements by allied departments, and to understand if activities were taking place as per government mandate, and to understand women's collective role in also supporting COVID-19 response and the challenges faced. So the program already had an established process monitoring and program review system. For this, community resource persons would self-report and share data on coverage of interventions on paper-based monthly monitoring formats, which you can see on the right. These reports were collated and shared by supervisors at the cluster level and were further collated by block MIS coordinators, who are the reporting link with the district and state program management units. Because paper-based data collection was halted during the lockdown, this system was adapted for telemonitoring. So a rapid, retrospective, and concurrent process was set up, and data was collected from 5 of the intervention sites. We collected data from 2 kinds of program implementers, the program staff as well as women collective representatives. From program staff, we reached a total of 12 respondents using self-administered online questionnaires. Among women collective representatives, we reached 370 respondents, including community resource persons, VO and CLF office bearers who were interviewed via telephonic interviews. Government advisories from the Ministry of Rural Development and allied departments on delivery of essential nutrition and health services issued between the period of March to July 2020 were also collated and tracked for triangulation. Purposive selection of village organizations was done. So VOs in villages with low cellular network coverage or VOs where Poshan Sakhis did not have access to phones were excluded from the sampling frame. The VO served as a primary sampling unit to sample Poshan Sakhis and VO office bearers, and a sample of 158 VOs was drawn using the probability proportional to size method. VOs from each state were then selected by systematic random sampling, and from each VO, a Poshan Sakhi, Kishori Sakhi, and a village organization office bearer were interviewed. Data was also collected from all 19 CLFs in intervention blocks to gain a holistic picture of the impact on interventions. So amongst the community cadre, which includes village organization and CLF office bearers and the community resource persons, in Bihar, of the sampled 129 respondents, we reached 125. In Chhattisgarh, we reached all 126 respondents, and in Odisha, we reached 119 of 122 respondents sampled. We had a completion rate of over 97%. In each state, data collection was done by a team of 6 data collectors managed by a supervisor. MIS coordinators at the block level who usually collect this program data were also included in the data collection team. Data collectors had to be computer literate, had access to computer, mobile phone, fluency in the local language, and prior experience in face-to-face data collection. They were trained on telephonic data collection techniques and on ethics of remote data collection. Prior information was shared with respondents about the shift to telemonitoring, and verbal consent was taken from the respondents. So this monthly monitoring format, which you see on the right, was adapted into interview schedules to collect data on the same indicators. These had close-ended questions on the status of community-led activities, nutrition services and health services, access to agri, poultry, and social protection funds, community response to COVID-19, food shortages, and support that was required. Responses were recorded as halted, resumed, or continuing in a different manner. Coverage was recorded with numeric input, and a provision to add qualitative notes was also given. Tools were tested with respondents equivalent to 5% of the sample to check feasibility for telephonic administration, and the interview length was about 25 to 30 minutes for each tool. A data collection manual along with protocols for refusal and addressing sensitive topics were also prepared in advance. Quality control checks were done with back checks conducted with 10% of the interviewed sample, along with daily consistency checks of e-data. Program staff at block district and state levels were also interviewed, and 3 tools were developed for this with close-ended questions on the status of program activities, trainings, program reporting processes, and support provided for COVID-19 response. And the tools were hosted online on a software developed by Microware Computing and Consulting. Simple descriptive analysis was conducted, and the qualitative notes were translated and manually coded on Excel. So what did we find? The results were developed into scorecards to share with administration teams. And here what we see is that home visits and door-to-door visits, as well as Nutri-Garden development, were largely continued and also received new impetus during the lockdown. Group-based counseling meetings or baithaks and monthly, quarterly food demonstrations were largely halted, or in certain states continued differently with smaller numbers and adherence to physical distancing norms. Amongst the system's actions, antenatal care outreach was continued, and in Odisha and Chhattisgarh, this was provided largely through combined home visits by Poshan Sakhis with the AAA frontline workers, as well as provision for ration through PDS and take-home ration at the Anganwadi centers was continued. Spot feeding programs such as the hot cooked meals, midday meals, and micronutrient supplementation were largely halted. We also see here that respondents reported conducting joint home visits with the AAA, and that they also prioritized reaching nutritionally at-risk target groups and their families. They were engaged in awareness on COVID-19 prevention. 94% reported being engaged in hand washing demonstrations, 67% in production and distribution of soaps, masks, and sanitizers, and 60% on identification of vulnerable households and positive COVID-19 cases. They also supported gap fill for disrupted services. So 24%, for instance, reported carrying out production of take-home ration and delivering this at the doorstep. Emergency funds in each state, which are provided to these community institutions via NRLM and the state rural livelihoods missions, were leveraged to support gap fill for nutrition supplementation, like production of THR. And these funds were also used to support target vulnerable groups, including anemic and pregnant women, adolescent girls, children, and providing food, grains, vegetables, and eggs to these target groups. Amongst the challenges, we found that jobs and livelihoods were most affected. Additionally, there was fear and anxiety in the community around the virus. There was also objection from family members for participation in door-to-door awareness generation, and these were the most cited challenges, followed by access to markets, rising food prices, and worry over loan repayment. There was also increased number of home visits that the women collective members had to be conducted, and this pressure was felt as an increased burden of work at home and also with school closures. So operational know-how on conducting phone surveys in low technology settings, particularly in India, is evolving, but existing literature shows that this can be promising. One global review showed that telemonitoring can help organizations to monitor program activities and take corrective action. A 2008 study on the use of telephone surveys in urban South India found similar response rates between telephone and face-to-face data collection for examining non-sensitive issues, and that response rates were enough to avoid a non-response bias. Another recent longitudinal design study, which used phone surveys to collect data on menstrual hygiene management interventions amongst SHG women in Tamil Nadu, also found high response rates and low item non-response for sensitive behavior reporting. Our own experience in a rural setting also concurs with these findings, but we had specific lessons and challenges. We found that non-response because of invalid phone numbers, power cuts, low balance was avoided, as the MIS coordinators were already familiar with respondents' lived environments. So we had insider information. As you can see on the right, there is a quote from the data collectors. Collection of contact numbers was a challenge, and this impacted the sampling frame. Data collectors' gender also impacted their ability to reach female respondents. So many women didn't own phones, and when husbands were often suspicious, we also had to take appointments from the husbands in order to be able to speak to female respondents. Times of the calls had to be planned around farming and domestic work. Yeah, I'm wrapping up.
Yeah. Thank you.
Other challenges included probing over phone and training data collectors to do this via short virtual trainings, which were less immersive. And there was also a challenge of familiarizing data collectors on this multi-sector program. Comprehending regional dialects and of course bias of data collector and the respondents, since the MIS coordinators usually collect data from these respondents, there was a tendency to over-report. Checking and validation of the information collected were other challenges. We also found that there was a need to compensate respondents to participate in this telemonitoring process with mobile recharge, and addressing requests and expectations from the respondents during the call were other challenges. So to conclude, we found that the process enabled timely data collection in a 5-week process. The simple indicators which the respondents were familiar with enabled an easy transition to telemonitoring. Information was directly taken from the VO, and it also visibilized women collectives' efforts on the ground. And since Swabiman is a demonstration program, the telemonitoring system was developed with the state implementation teams, and their capacity were built for taking up such a process during public health emergencies. So for round 2, we aim to collect data on the status of interventions post-unlock. The program team will be further capacitated, and women collective leaders will also be trained on remote data collection techniques. For this, the web-based CMS will now be developed into mobile-based application, so that data collection can also be done in low connectivity areas, and this will enable us to incrementally collect data from 100% of the VOs in our intervention sites. So I look forward to comments from the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's kind of wonderful to see all that work. Maybe we're actually running short on time. Can I request Gopal Krishna to please present it within 10 minutes if it is possible, so that it provides enough time for discussion towards the end. I know I'm unfair to you and maybe the next presenter as well, but please go ahead. Over to you, Mr. Gopal Krishna.
Making my presentation without a PowerPoint. I think that I can make a point without a PowerPoint. So the paper is titled Constitutional Implications of Panoptic and Synoptic Aid on Population, an inquiry into data collection during pandemic. Panoptical refers to the few seeing the many, and synoptical refers to the many seeing the few. Before I proceed, I want to draw on certain provisions of the Constitution of India. Article 21 of the Constitution of India says that no person shall be deprived of his life or personal liberty except according to the procedure established by law. The 1500-page long manifesto titled A European Declaration of Independence, brought out by Norwegian gunman and neo-crusader Anders Behring Breivik, who carried out the heinous attack by bombing governmental buildings in Oslo, killing his fellow citizens on 22nd July 2011, is quite relevant in the present times. This manifesto refers to the word identity over 100 times, unique over 40 times, and identification over 10 times. There is reference to state-issued identity cards, converts, identity cards, fingerprints, DNA, etc. This manifesto by the neo-crusader gunman has underlined its obsession with some of his prejudices and ideas. Some proponents of indiscriminate centralized data collection applications and schemes seem to have internalized the biases and prejudices of the neo-crusader. This internalization of biases and prejudices have naturalized the gaze of panopticon and synopticon on human populations. The reason I want to bring this to light to my paper is because in this architecture of panopticon, all those humans who have been made subhuman through their categorization as prisoners or through other categorizations are under inspection, and in its reincarnation as digital panopticon has enabled it to envelop the entire human population and subject them to eternal inspection. This idea has magnified manifold. its merger with the idea of Synopticon is paving the way for 360-degree surveillance of every imaginable human activity. Unlike Panopticon, in Synopticon, a small risk group is put under constant gaze of a larger section of population who happen to believe them to be a part of a risk group. For long, Synopticon has been deemed to be the reverse of the Panopticon, but it does not mean that both cannot work in tandem. After profiling through mass surveillance using Panopticon, the risk group is singled out while undertaking data collection and subjected to Synopticon. The latter is used to legitimize the former in the public sphere through apparent ground truthing of sorts in order to set out the agenda of what people think about and how they think about it. Some aspects of it have been underlined in several verdicts of the courts in Europe. It all began with a pamphlet by Jeremy Bentham, but I will not go into his paper. I would restrict my presentation to the emergence of computers, smart mobile phones, social media platforms like Facebook, as an information panopticon and synopticon has enabled monitoring of the work and behavior of individuals through eternal scrutiny. The individuals and groups can always be watched, but they cannot see the eyes that watch them. The poor and the risk groups are being profiled for the umpteenth time by identification technologies. And this reminds me of what Max Weber said. Technological inevitability does not exist. Technologies are always economic means, not ends in themselves. In modern times, technologies DNA comes embedded with economic orientation. Economic ends are always intrinsic to technology, development, and deployment. Economic action determines objectives. Technology provides appropriate means. Therefore, the profiling of the poor and the risk groups has, for the umpteenth time, by identification technologies which are used for data collection and has to be looked at in a new context. Automatic identification technologies and applications are facilitating stigmatization, discrimination, and physical assaults on these groups. A growing convergence between the beneficial owners of these technologies and the state is creating a technopolis, where squeezing of natural rights through greater panoptic and synoptic ways and manipulation of public behavior is deemed natural and normal. In the present era, the panoptic gaze focuses on the entire human population, but its specific focus on minorities, migrants, and their defenders is disconcerting, especially because their fate awaits the rest of the society. Such seemingly unregulated and ungovernable data collection technologies are increasingly getting misused for profiling and mass surveillance, and they could be used even after the pandemic outbreak is over. It has increased the vulnerability of the communities, migrants, and the defenders who get profiled. Profiling facilitates emergence of a police state. In this context, profiling means any form of automated processing of personal data consisting of the use of personal data to evaluate certain personal aspects related to a natural person. In particular, to analyze or predict aspects concerning that natural person's performance at work, economic situation, health, personal preferences, interests, reliability, human behavior, location, or movement. Such profiling based on apparent rationality or system rationality of the proponents of panoptic and synoptic technologies is embedded in intelligence and predictability inferred from metadata. This metadata requires to be understood. Metadata refers to indiscriminate and disproportionate data collection regarding all aspects of person, including telephone number, internet protocol address, biometrics, demographic details, authentication records, transaction records, travel records. This rationality seems callous towards the truthful inquiry into the human condition and confines itself to subjective instrumental inquiry. It is blind to the far-reaching implications of permanent storages of metadata. Such exercise is being undertaken using these technologies without adherence to the principles of consent, purpose, and storage limitation, data differentiation, data exception, data minimization, substantive procedural fairness, safeguards, transparency, data protection, and security. Metadata is a soft target for internal, external, indigenous, and foreign attacks. It admittedly creates the biggest risk of single point failure. Without expanding on it further, I just want to mention that profiling has resulted in violence and discrimination based on religion, ethnicity, caste, and class facilitated. There are anecdotal and oral narratives which reveal how existing databases and have been used and how they have been leaked to facilitate perpetrators of mass violence. Such violence is also aimed at disruption of human activities of the minorities, migrants, and those who are portrayed to be of a different race, religion, ethnicity, and beliefs. The resentment against the relative economic prosperity of those who are supposedly non-natives or risk groups gets manifested when their economic activities are subjected to both synoptic and synoptic gaze. Towards conclusion, I would say that the social stigma associated with victims of COVID-19 in general and minority communities and migrants in particular have culminated into increased hostility, chaos, and unnecessary social disruption. In complete disregard of objective reason, such uncritical and unreasoned narratives, which have been encouraged and nurtured, that they have wider ramifications. It goes beyond victims of the disease and communities which have been mysteriously categorized as risk groups. The portrayal of victims as risk groups seems to help it to cover inadequacies. But there is another thing which I want to allude to before I conclude. There is an identifiable.
Mr. Gopal, can you just conclude in 1 minute? Thank you.
Yeah. There is an identified historical pattern in India and elsewhere wherein minority groups, migrants, and dissenters have been portrayed as risk groups with ulterior motives of total subjugation. Towards conclusion, and the last point I would like to say that who has control over the repository of memory and data has consequences of present and future generations. Such eventuality can pave way for unlimited government, not limited by the Constitution of India. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think some excellent points that you have made about the whole, how much the technology is used, abused, and what are the steps that we need to take. Okay, our last presenter for this session is from Shilpa Jain. May I request you to take 10 minutes to present the topic. Thank you. Over to you.
Am I audible? Hello.
Yes, you are.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Put it in the slide mode.
Thank you, IPS jury, for giving me this opportunity to present my abstract and my paper under the theme of data collection during pandemic challenges and opportunity. I, Dr. Shilpa Jain, represent here not-for-profit, that is Khushi, Mr. Kapil Dev Foundation, and with the hit of this pandemic, because we work in the community development space while working with the community under various program initiatives, it led us to do a kind of a rapid assessment survey on the lines of rapid need assessment for accessibility of digital education during COVID-19 pandemic. Because we as an organization, we work in the community development and quality education initiatives, so it became an imperative for us during this COVID-19 school lockdown phase how to re-strategize our programs which are best suited to the current scenario. So the aim of the research, research which we conducted, was to conduct a rapid need assessment for bridging the digital divide in education during COVID-19 pandemic through community learning centers. Because earlier, what we were doing was more of a school to community based approach, but now because of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was an exclusive lockdown of the school, so we have to re-strategize and realign our goals from school to community to school based approach. With the pandemic, there has been a need to consider how to implement planned interventions differently for CSOs like us to meet the existing development needs, as well as look into how pandemic has affected and what we as an organization can work on and how we can make a difference. All this created an increased demand for information, data, and evidence for us, and so that we can proceed safely and effectively. This all eventually affected our interventions and program strategies also while working with the communities and led to this survey. Uh, and because of the COVID-19 lockdown situation and social distancing measures, it also affected our data collection, our survey, our research in terms of getting the data enumerators also on board with us who could conduct these kind of data collection drives for us, and all because there was a risk for contracting COVID-19 for not only by our data enumerators but also for the respondents. As a result of which, there has to be a shift in strategy from person face-to-face kind of an approach to remote practices in terms of utilizing other ICT tools like telephonic interviews, social media interviews, which utilizing social media platform for conducting the interviews with the community people, and also mobilizing the community and identifying the students for enrollment into the community learning centers, which we as an organization promoted to tackle the continuity in education. So, with regards to the COVID-19 measures under the methodology and social distancing were taken to ensure the safety of respondents and enumerators, and there was a separate SOP, which was SOP guideline, which was prepared for the data enumerators in order to conduct the face-to-face interviews also, because part of our survey included face-to-face and other approaches. In terms of sample selection, we did a random. There was a random household selection process, which was undertaken. However, the study geographies, they were purposively selected as Delhi, Bangalore, Haryana, Punjab, Rajasthan, where Khushi's education projects already were established, because we were aware of the community and community was also aware of our intervention. So we purposively selected these areas. In the data collection, the assessment involved a mixed method approach, and the data was collected using phone calls, WhatsApp groups, and face-to-face interviews. In terms of monitoring and quality control measures while collecting the data, we the 10% random checks and daily checks on the consistency of data, and also followed by fewer field visits by the data collection team, by the data collection supervisor team was done, and also duplication of data collection was monitored by allocating designated areas to the data enumerators. In terms of data analysis and interpretation, the quantitative data was analyzed using MS Excel while doing descriptive analysis of the data. In terms of the result, overall, there was a sample size of 17,728 for which we studied under the study, and if we see in the terms of the data collection mode, however, face-to-face interviews, still it ranks one. It was still the major point of data collection for us. But if we see the other modes, in fact, there was a high rate of also refusal or incomplete forms because of the refusal in terms of getting COVID-19, the safety things associated with the respondents, and not in fact also allowing not also undertaking the phone calls for giving the information for the survey, and also not cooperating with regards to the when they were approached through WhatsApp groups. Those were school student teachers WhatsApp groups through which we approached them. So especially in the urban city of Bangalore, there was a huge number of non-respondents which we have observed, and that was particularly because over there the key social area, the key social dimension for the parents and for the family members was not education. They don't the education was not their priority at that time, and at that point in time when we conducted this survey. And this survey was conducted in a periodic, in a phase-wise manner, wherein the northern states were covered in the month of August, because over there the government has initiated the programs like COVID testing was initiated there in time in those times. And however, in southern states it took a lot of, especially in Bangalore, it took a lot of time. So that's how in Bangalore we started doing this data collection in the month of September. But still, the non-respondent rates have been quite high in the urban city of Bangalore. Coming to the certain demographic results which we obtained, which we in fact gathered from the data which we collected under our study, was in terms of the gender. And if we see in most of all these gender relation to the respondents, annual income, education qualification, there have been many responses don't want to share. So this shows, the response biasness of the respondents whom we have contacted during our research survey. Because over at that point in time in the COVID-19 pandemic situation, answering to such surveys was never would never have been a priority for a low economic group, low socioeconomic strata group people. Whom we are connecting with, and whom we are taking these responses from. And if we see, in fact, the annual income of the family, approximately 60% of these community members, they come from they have an annual income of family which is below 1 lakh rupees per annum. So, and this is pre-COVID, when the lockdown has not happened. And because we have to also shorten our questionnaire with regards to, because we have to take certain telephonic interviews also, and the length of the telephonic interviews could not exceed the time limit of approximately 20 to 30 minutes, while in case of face-to-face interviews it was approximately 40 minutes. So those questions pertaining to that, what has been the situation of the family after COVID, during this COVID pandemic 19, it has also shown a devastating lesser annual income of family. Few of the members were not even employed at this stage in time. Coming to the challenges and opportunities which we observed during doing this data collection, a few of the challenges was that for most instances, repeated phone calls have to be made to complete the survey. Why? Because like if we go back on the in terms of who have been the respondent of the student, 42% have been mothers and 48% have been fathers. When it came to mothers, there was always a issue of privacy, in terms of, because fathers being the male figure being being the head of the family, so females were not very open to share certain information because of privacy issues, so that they are not being overheard. So that's why there was repeated phone calls needs to be made while doing the telephonic interviews with these kind of respondents in order to complete the survey. Then also there was a lot of demand bias from the respondents which we have observed, because we are a CSO, we work with the community, so all and community knowing us as an organization, they also had a lot of expectations coming out when they responded to few of our questions, like in terms of giving them essential commodities like ration, medicines, also giving them certain other medical relief, economic relief, and also because we were addressing to a question of digital divide in education. So if we see here the availability of any device for online classes and the students attending online classes regularly, there has been a huge divide. However, 73% said that they have smartphones for with internet for online classes, but out of which only 50% of the students were attending online classes regularly. So there was a huge, we can say there was a huge skewness which we found, in the respondents answering to these kind of questions. So this clearly demarcated that there was a demand bias from respondents which we observed while doing this kind of a survey. And also appointing data enumerators was a challenge, because in COVID-19 situation, everyone had safety concerns for themselves. So in order to address this issue, what we did was that we have to revise the qualification, the educational qualification for the data enumerators from being a graduate to class 12 pass. So we have to also, so out of the 40 respondents whom we have, who were appointed with us as data enumerators, out of that, approximately 57% were 12th pass students. And they were not graduates, but yes, extensive 3 days training schedule. Training was done with these data enumerators in order to make them understand that what is the objective of the study and what are the kind of SOPs they need to follow. And also assessment before conducting the survey was done with these kind of data enumerators. Then
Dr.
also there was.
Shilpa, I request you to wrap up in 1 minute
Yes,
or
sir.
two.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Then also there was refusal of face-to-face interviews by the respondents, again because of the COVID-19 contraction. Also, respondent fatigue was another challenge when we did the telephonic interviews. A lot of there was respondent fatigue, and also a lack of concentration to address the questions properly while we conducting these telephonic interviews. And poor internet connectivity was another major challenge which has been there in the low connective zones where we connected with the people. Then along with these challenges, we also had certain opportunities while doing the data collection in this kind of a phase, where along with face-to-face, we use remote technology. That was the wider reach in terms of because getting access to the telephone numbers and getting prior appointments with the respondents, and then reaching out to them. So it helped us in getting a wider reach towards these respondents, and and applying a more systematic approach in terms of getting set to the timelines, that yes, this respondent will answer us at 9 a.m. in the clock. This respondent will answer us at 12 p.m. So based upon the appointment basis, there was a more of a systematic approach which was observed and which was carried out. And also this survey has also pointed out a very genuine thing, that reviewing our practice of over assessing populations, because while doing any kind of a survey, which we always used to keep at least 13-14 questions have to be demographic, socioeconomic status data. But when we did the telephonic interview, we have to cut down certain those key questions of demography, of socioeconomic status of the family, in order to keep focused questions or as per our requirement. And also retrace respondents for data confirmation, because we had contact details of the respondents while doing the telephonic interviews, while also doing the WhatsApp group interviews with the respondents. So we could easily retrace respondents if there was any kind of a data mismatch or data or some blank datas were there. So retraced respondent was another opportunity which we gathered from this kind of while utilizing these kind of remote technology. So in conclusion, I would based upon the survey, would like to state that that mixed mode survey offers a great flexibility in the COVID-19 situation. And yeah. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. This is excellent point that, I mean, not one type of data collection in the situation of the epidemics can actually be providing perfect answer. And each of these data collection methods have their own opportunities as well as challenges. So may I now request Professor Lakshmikant Dwivedi to comment on the presentations that we have heard before we go into the question and answer for the presenters. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, sir. I think in this session, data collection during pandemic challenges and opportunities, there are 5 papers are presented, and they are excellent in nature. So the first paper was presented by Dr. Basu on measuring access mortality during the COVID-19 pandemic in India, the need for mobile phone survey. I think it is a very good, interesting paper. And but the thought what Sir Dr. Basu had presented, the thought it was somewhere the matching with the thought of the what earlier published paper on this line. So my request how this paper is converted in the Indian context, that is very much important, that whole whatever view he has presented that need to be resaid in the context of India, how looking at the to what extent it was spread between rural and urban area, when the time of peaks come and when it is going down. So in this complete context of COVID-19, this paper need to be revised. Otherwise, there are many questions will come like, how do you select the sample? Because there is no complete list of the mobile phone users. You don't have even the mobile phone users are not that much as compared to the other low income countries. So how to get the frame? So by this, that frame, you have to select the sample, and that frame may be taken from the 2 or 3 different studies. So dual sampling frame or three different sources. One can collect the frame and then you can select the sample and then you do it. So in this study also non-response rate is very high. So how do you control the non-response rate? Even if you look at the older and newer generation, like older, they don't like to speak of 20-25 minutes in a time. Then they love to maybe 5 minutes break, 10 minutes breaks are there. Then how do you deal that one? And what type of question? Maybe that question, whatever you have suggested, like household survey, sibling based survey, or any other method, what you have suggested to ask it whether it is relevant in this Indian context, because directly, even if you are going in the back check in the NFHS survey, but you cannot ask directly that how many deaths has been occurred in your household. You have to think 2-3 times to ask this question. That need to be discussed. I think this Indian context whole paper is very much important. Whatever Dr. Basu has presented, that is his opinion is well accepted, but this need to be converted in the Indian context. So that is the my one. And second one, second presentation is digitization a solution to socioeconomic and health related challenges of future pandemics by Ms. Anjali Sharma. I think she has presented very well and she has collected the random sample. But if you look at our title of this seminar is the data collection during pandemic, challenges and opportunities. So how you have selected this 300 sample? It's not a random sampling. I think you have studied that this random sampling is a little bit tough. You need complete frame and then you have to select the simple random sampling. You cannot use the word loosely to simple random sampling. You have selected the 300 participants, and even you are not interested, what are the characteristics, what findings comes by these 300 participants. You are more interested in how you have selected these 300 sample, what different approaches you have adopted, maybe through Google Map and then through Google Form, and then you have communicated in WhatsApp group or some other group. So how many groups you have communicated, and after that how many response you got it, how many have promised, like this type of what challenges you have faced. If you have focused on that part, it will be more asset. Otherwise, whatever you presented, that is also meaningful, but need to be revised in that context. So that is the second one, sir. And third paper on the Swabhiman intervention project, since I'm also part of that from the IPS side, so might be not that much, but the question is that site is very much useful, very much well known to the Rosni, well known to the IPS, and well known to the UNICEF. And in this context, if you conduct any type of interview, this is very much conducive. They will reply each and every question. And if you go for an unknown community and ask the question, it is completely different. So whatever your findings are presented, that is well accepted and you have done it. But I think your purpose was different, rather than what type of problems you face during data collection. But your purpose is to look at the different what type of problems they are facing, whether they are getting the ration card or not, or food is appropriate online. So that issue is okay. Otherwise, the data collection it doesn't fit, because otherwise you have to highlight this is a very well-known community to everyone, and then you are collecting the data. Now coming to the fourth paper, actually I was trying to listen and not from that discipline what sir has expressed his opinion. So I'm not very much comfort to comment on this one, but that is his opinion. And as a as a common man or as a researcher, if you ask me, then we will not that much accept unless until it is based on a very solid logic. Maybe whatever there is a new technology has come, like Facebook and WhatsApp, there is a issues there, privacy and other concerns are there, and well accepted. There is no, but there are many use of this Facebook data and other newspaper data. For example, if you look at during this pandemic period, how they have shifted from allopathy to the traditional medicine. So this has been analyzed using the Facebook data through AI method. So you cannot only give the negative side of this technology, rather than you have to put the positive side, like Arogya Setu app. Okay, that in India it is, there is a question, it is India, it may not be success, but if you look at the South Korea and other parts of the country where there is a use is 100%, it is more effective. People, you can compute the probability, what is the probability of that one symptom and one without symptom and will come to the closure. So there are many modeling and many more analysis has been done, although that is your view, but I completely not agree whatever view you presented, because that Arogya Setu app and there are many other technology which had come, artificial intelligence, it has a very significant contribution in the case of healthcare sector, and they have a change in that one. That this 100% change has been observed in the health sector because of the technology one. Now in the last paper, again, Khushi Foundation, they have done a good analysis. So we are more interested that what results has been different if they are using the WhatsApp group, if they are using the telephone survey, and they are conducting the survey through one-to-one. So all these three, they have adopted different survey methods. So how these different survey methods leads to different results. Maybe what type of characteristics they have captured in the person to person and in the case of face-to-face interview. I think that need to be analyzed. Otherwise, it is a very good attempt. And again, I am telling all the papers are excellent, and it may be published after revising this one. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for giving me opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Lakshmikant. Those are excellent points that you have made. I don't know, since we have very limited time, and I know that there is another plenary session at 5:30, maybe I would like to give the presenters an opportunity to reflect on some of the points that Dr. Lakshmikant made. And I have one overarching question, is that to be really in terms of the data collection, we all know that telephone method has been one of the promising and useful given the penetration of the telephone in many areas. But how do one deal with the two types of error? And how did you deal with those two types of error? One was the response bias. The other is the reporting bias, because in case of the face-to-face interview, there could be some certain practices that you can adapt to do the validation, but in the telephone interview, what is that opportunity that exists or the opportunity that lost? So over to the presenters if you want to comment or reflect on any of these points. Anyone?
Dr. Niranjan.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for your suggestion, and mortality and in
Hello, Dr. Basu. We can't hear you. Your voice is breaking. I thought it's only to me, but I see the message from Deepthi. So your voice is breaking. Sorry.
Sorry, sir, this happens sometimes because of the connection problem.
Yeah.
We are sorry for the inconvenience. Hello?
Any other presenter would like to come at this time? Maybe once Dr. Basu's signal is set, we can hear him more clearly.
Could I respond? There were a few things.
Please go ahead, Ms. Neha.
We tried to triangulate by asking, we were talking to 3 different types of respondents. And so we tried to triangulate the responses that they were saying. And we also had, as we mentioned in the presentation, had collected advisory. So we tried to do this one level of triangulation. There are also certain indicators which don't change over time. So we already had data on the number of target groups, for instance, present in a particular catchment area. So if someone was saying that services have been delivered to a certain number of target groups, we could match it with that data that we had for certain indicators. So these were 2 things that we did.
Okay, thank you. Any other responses? Dr. Shilpa, anything that you would like to say?
Yes, sir. So, I also pointed out while presenting that there was a response bias in terms of because our thing addressed the digital education part of it. So there was also a question regarding whether the people have any kind of a smart device to assess the online classes being provided by the government. So in terms of the response bias which we got was that however 73% of the people did get, but in terms of attendance that was very poor. To reaffirmate these things, because we work very closely, we work with the government schools, in those government schools particularly where this survey was done. So we kind of rechecked the responses from the school teachers because the students were part of those online class groups, in order to understand that whether actually the availability of the digital device is an issue, or connection or network connectivity is an issue, or the whole intent to attend the classes regularly is an issue. So these were the kind of response biases which were addressed from our end to analyze and then to put it into an implementation plan by our organization.
Thank you. So, Mr. Gopal, anything that you would like to say? We just have 1 minute before we can conclude the session. No? Anyone has any one quick burning question?
Sir, however, we did this is Shilpa here. Sir, however, we did this kind of a survey, but there has been a lot of query, and there has been a lot of questioning in terms of the confidence interval associated with this kind of data collection tools while using the remote technology tools specifically. Because when it is face to face, then these confidence level of 95%, 90%, they can be easily moderated. I mean, they are still controlled in a controlled manner. But when we come to collecting data from from computer aided tool or telephonic interviews, then it becomes a challenge. So if you can throw some light on that, maybe or any other person or anyone in among the panel group can throw some light on that, it will be great.
Yeah. So Dr. Lakshmikant, would you like to take up this question or?
Well, you can explain some other.
Yeah, I think it's more also to do with the what is the sampling frame and how are we monitoring our response from the telephone survey that's been conducted, and to what extent the responses have been received. So there are a lot of statistics that are required in order to get those confidence intervals estimated. Although from the actual data for the estimates, you can, the software can generate some data, but that may not be accurate enough to reflect what otherwise happens in case of when you do the complete sampling frame and collect the estimates from it. So I think there is another plenary session that's going to happen at 5:30. So I thank all the presenters for your wonderful presentations and excellent work and your perspectives about the challenges and the opportunities that the technology are the new ways of collecting data, and that includes also new ways of defining who the population that you're surveying and how you are reaching those survey population. There are a lot of learnings, and all of these to be in the published format, because these learnings could be helpful if the COVID-19 epidemic continues, or that the future epidemics like COVID-19 comes again in the world at any point in time in the future. So thanks so much to IAPS as well for giving me an opportunity to chair the session, to all the organizers. Once again, I congratulate all the presenters for your excellent work and perspectives in the session. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you all for the, sir. Thank you, Niranjan. Thank you, Lakshmikant. Thank you, Deepti, and all the participants for being in the session and presenting well, chairing the session, as well as discussant, as well as rapporteur doing the job. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
चलो भाई दूसरा सेशन